master at the helm there.
Right, hi everyone, Chris here from Easy Tiger 2. If you've watched the previous 11 episodes, you'll know we've done our circumnavigation of Great Britain. And in this video and the next one, so the next couple of videos, we're going to have a little think about what we've learnt and try and pass on any sort of bits of wisdom and advice that have occurred to us since then. None of this is super profound, and some of it falls into the category of the bleeding obvious, but it's I thought we'd do the videos just in case you are planning your own circumnavigation and things to think about. Okay, first kind of musing number one is to take your time. Obviously how much time you have depends on if you're still working or whatever. Now when we did this trip, we thought we'd done it very quickly and that we had missed out on a lot of stuff, and it is undoubtedly the case, and I still feel this now, some months after the trip is finished, that we missed out on seeing an awful lot. Certainly makes it worth doing another trip. But what I thought I'd do is to see whether we were unusual or not. Now it turns out that Sam Steele, who wrote the book An Island Circumnavigator's Guide, actually did a survey of people who'd been around the route that we did, which is going through the Caledonian Canal. And as you can see from these figures, the distance we sailed and our average passage length and the amount of time we spent at sea and the number of places we visited was pretty kind of average. It was not particularly a long trip or a short trip, although we felt it wasn't a very long trip. It seems to be about the average of what people do. We visited all of these places and they were all interesting in their own different ways, but there's an awful lot more to see. Now if you've got the time and energy, you might want to have a look at Dylan Winter's YouTube channel called Keep Turning Left. Details are up on the screen there. Dylan Winter's been doing a circumnavigation of the UK, and he started something like 7 or 8 years ago and he still hasn't finished. I was drawn to doing circumnavigation in the first place, partly because of Dylan's channel, and he saw an awful lot more. But if you're thinking about this, you need to be thinking about whether this might be 2 trips around the UK rather than 1, because there is such a lot of stuff out there to see. We were under lots of time pressures, mainly because Paul, James and Nigel and co had to get back to various places, and that meant that we were forced to be in certain places at certain times, and so we were kind of felt more rushed along than perhaps we would have liked. So just something to think about. If you're after a leisurely trip, give yourself plenty of time and possibly do what Dylan did, which is to stop and do it very, very slowly, stop in lots of places, leave your boat in lots and lots of places. Obviously that's going to be quite expensive, but if you want to see the UK, there's a lot of it and you need some time to do it. Number 2 then, stuff will break. It goes without saying that if you own a yacht, stuff's going to get broken every so often, and although we had spent quite a lot of money beforehand, we'd spent a lot of money on getting the engine sorted out, cleaned the injectors and all that kind of stuff, and we had the standing rigging done, we still had some breakages, the most notable of which being the drive coupling, which cost us quite a few quid, and we also had the jib car go on us. In hindsight, I think that probably wasn't too bad. For sure, it would have been better if we'd been able to catch that drive coupling before we'd gone, but not very much we could do about it. I don't see what we would have done to have prevented the jib car going. What is the case, though, is that in both situations, we were extremely lucky that nothing worse happened to us when it did. So when the jib car went, that roller could have hit somebody in the face had they been on the wrong side of the boat when it went, so luckily nobody was. And similarly, the conditions were very, very nice and benign when we did have the drive coupling going. The wind did pick up, we were able to sail into Falmouth, and so all in all it was quite okay. But if you're thinking of doing this trip, there's no way you're going to do it without something breaking. You're going to be very, very lucky if you get around without something breaking. Now, if you can remember way back to episode 1, I spent a bit of time in the very first video musing about whether to go around the UK anti-clockwise or clockwise, and obviously we went the anti-clockwise route. And I was hoping to say at the end of the trip whether that was a good or a bad thing. Now, I haven't done both ways round, so I can't tell you which one was better, but there certainly was nothing wrong with going round anti-clockwise. We had a prejudice, I guess, that the east coast would be less exciting than the west coast, and more broadly speaking, that's probably true. Certainly were some long legs on the east coast, and it was more fun to have something to look forward to than to get the good bits out of the way first and then have the slightly less good bits later on. So I think in that sense anti-clockwise was satisfactory, but I don't think I have anything meaningful to say beyond that, because a lot of people go the other way around and are very happy with that as well. So I don't think anything really matters in that respect. Number 4, pot markers. Now, there's a lot written about this, and in that Sam Steele book I mentioned earlier in the video, she mentions that most of the people who contributed to her surveys had some kind of interaction with pot markers at some point on the trip. We got one wrapped round our prop off the Isle of May, caused us quite a lot of consternation at the time, and they're quite difficult to miss, particularly at night. In fact, at night they're almost impossible to see because nobody lights them for fairly obvious reasons. So if you are thinking of doing night passages, you might want to think hard about whether you want to motor close into the shore. You probably want to spend a bit of time getting some distance away from the shore, certainly beyond the 20-metre contour, if you want to have a peaceful night. Now, up certain parts of the country, particularly sort of North Yorkshire and in the east coast of Scotland, some of the locals had got into the habit of marking their buoys with some fairly tall flags, which is quite good, and they are certainly much easier to see than the alternatives. But there's also a whole load of people who presumably don't care too much about their pot markers, because they often have very dark coloured ones which barely sit above the top of the water. So you really do need to keep a good lookout for these things. Pain in the neck, but obviously people are trying to earn a living out of this, so we have to kind of live with it. Number 5 then, the weather. Now, this is obviously a channel that is about sailing, and the weather has a big influence on how pleasurable it is to sail. If there's no wind, you don't move, and if there's too much wind, you don't want to sail anyway. I think one of the things that really struck us was just how much we were influenced by the weather. When we get somewhere, if it was sunny, we generally speaking were happy about being there, and the opposite was true. If it was miserable and grey when we arrived somewhere, it made us feel less positive about the places. So our impressions of many of the places we visited seemed more to be influenced by the weather perhaps than anything else. And yeah, we know this, but it's just one of these things which makes you think about how much your memories of places and trips is influenced by how good the weather is. And as you can see from some of these pictures on the screen, some of the times we had some pretty nice weather, but some of the times we didn't. The corollary of this is that if you are looking forward to going somewhere, you might want to think about what the weather forecast says it's going to be like when you do get there. It'd be most disappointing to arrive somewhere in miserable weather and then feel that it was less good than you'd hoped for, than to arrive when the weather's nice. Easier said than done, of course, but just something to think about. All right, number 6, very quick one. Make use of your mobile phone. We had a couple of occasions where, had we not rung ahead to our port of destination, where we would have arrived only to find that we couldn't get in there. So really well worth ringing ahead. If you know where you're going to go and you've got the almanac, you can look up the number of the harbour master, give him a ring, and then at least you can be reasonably assured that there'll be something for you when you get there. Number 7 then, motoring versus sailing. All the books I've read about this have people lament the amount of time they have to spend on the engine to get to where they want to go. And unfortunately, this just seems to be true. Unless you've got all the time in the world and are prepared to wait for weather windows or bash through any old weather, you're going to have to motor quite a bit if you're going to get to where you want to be when you want to be. And this includes tidal gates, getting across sills into harbours and so on. Pretty much as expected, and I think in our trip we probably motored around about half the way around. So although we say we have sailed around the UK, really what we mean is we've kind of sailed and motored around the UK. Disappointing, but that's the way it is.